Good morning and welcome to our October LEA SE POC monthly webinar. Again, as Annette mentioned earlier, we have a copy of today's slides currently available on the SEDS resource site under the role LEA SE POC. We are encouraging participants to ask questions during the webinar, and we will actually give you an opportunity for with a pause and reflect. If you have any pressing questions regarding any of the updates that we will be presenting. Additionally, we will send a follow-up email likely at the end of this week that will help address any of the questions that we may not get to during the webinar. Let's get started. My name is Dina Shafee-Scott, and I'm joined by Annette Thacker-Bartlett. And we will be presenting some updates for the LEA SE POC monthly support webinar. Our agenda for today is to begin by discussing some SEDS updates and improvements. As everyone knows, beginning at the end of this week, you will no longer have access to SEDS, and we will actually go into this, but the new version of SEDS will be released on Monday, October the 20th. We'll also discuss some OSSE support tool updates. We will go into some resources for improvement in data quality. We'll discuss some training tips, and we will close with reminders and announcements. Let's start with everyone's favorite topic, SEDS updates and improvements. So we wanted to remind everyone that October 20th is the fall 2010-14 release of SEDS. And LEA SE POCs can prepare for and train your relevant staff by utilizing one or more of the following. So we've provided you with a plethora of training resources, and we wanted to basically discuss what those training resources are. So we had a October 1st webinar in which we discussed in much detail all of these updates that will occur on October the 20th, and this link is posted on the SEDS resource site. In just a moment, I'll actually walk you through how to access those this webinar. We have also provided you with a summary of changes document, which is a very valuable resource that you can use to train your users. We have a preparing for the 2014 release document, which highlights some of the changes that must occur prior to October 20th. And again, I will discuss these in more detail in just a moment. And we have also given you the opportunity to access a training demonstration account, which will only be available prior to October 20th. And again, I'll walk you through how to actually obtain one of these accounts in just a moment. You may also use your regular SEDS trainings accounts after October the 20th, as SEDS will transition to the new function and the new features after October the 20th. The training accounts that are pre-existing will then turn over, and you will be able to use those training accounts to train your users. The link that we have posted lists all of the training account names and passwords, and we just wanted to make sure that you know that these training accounts will be automatically updated after October the 20th to show any and all of the new SEDS updates. So for the 2014 SEDS Fall Release training resources, we wanted to let you know that you do have an opportunity, granted today is the 15th, up until the 17th at 6 p.m. to train your users on what to expect for the new version of SEDS. To train your school-based users prior to October the 20th, we are providing you an opportunity to access a staging account, and we will give POCs access to one training account per LEA. If you do wish to access a training account again prior to October the 17th, which is when SEDS will shut down, you can request a training account through the OSSE support tool, and the steps are as follows. You would submit a request for a training account on the OSSE support tool, and depending on what your role is, and in this particular instance you're the LEA SE POC, you would select training as your respective issue, and then you would select school-based training setup as your subcategory, and then we will go ahead and issue you a training account. Again, if you do this today, you have 2 days to train your users prior to the SEDS 2014 fall release. If you do, again, if you're a dependent charter and you're the LEA SE POC at the dependent charter, your submission will be slightly different. So rather than selecting training as the issue, you would instead select enrollment as the issue, and your subcategory would be special training account request. And again, if you know of non-public POCs that are interested in accessing a training account and you have a line of communication with those POCs, they would, instead of selecting training as the issue, select non-public as the issue type, and again, select special training account request as the subcategory. If you are interested in accessing the SEDS trainings account after October 20th, the traditional training route is the same. You would then go to the SEDS resource site, select the trainings tab above, and then you would select SEDS school-based trainings, as you see over here. The passwords and the usernames will be listed under Method 3, Hands-on Participation. And again, you can have multiple training accounts after this particular date. Prior to the 20th, you will only be given access to one training account. If you're interested in accessing the resources I spoke of earlier, then in order to get to be able to download a copy of the, for example, the Summary of Changes document, when you log onto the SEDS resource site, if you scroll down, you'll see the Special Education System Fall 2014 Release Announcements and Training, and you will click where it says, click here. Two of the very valuable resources that we have available for you, again, is Preparing for the 2014 Release, which highlights some of the necessary items that you must do prior to the 20th. Specifically, if you are amending an IEP or if you are currently still working on an IEP, which again I'll go into detail in just a moment. We also have available for you, and we recommend that you perhaps print out copies of the summary of items for release for the fall 2014 release, and give a copy to your users so they're aware of what these changes will be. And those documents are located at the bottom of that respective page. We wanted to kind of give you a preview and share with you two possible examples of what may happen prior to the 20th. So we wanted to prepare you and give you two case studies in which you would have to go in and rectify some of the necessary items prior to October 20th. So let's say, for example, your team schedules an annual IEP meeting prior to for October 21st. So this is after the 2014 SEDS release. You have a draft IEP created, but you have not yet finalized it. Some of the necessary steps that you must take after October 20th are the following. So your team needs to review the IEP fields and SEDS. There may be some fields that are affected by the update, and again, I'm going to talk about these relevant updates. And then you must finalize the IEP and include any and all of these necessary updates. So that is the first respective case study. Again, this is just for an IEP that is still in process. The next relevant case study is if you are working on an IEP amendment. So with this respective case study, you have an IEP that has been finalized on September the 10th. And again, this is prior to the October 20th release. After October 20th, you may, the IEP team may propose that there is a necessary, that you may have to amend the IEP for, let's say, for example, a testing accommodation. So in that case, there are two relevant items that you must pay attention to. The team will initiate the amendment process as usual in SEDS to add the testing accommodation that you've determined is necessary. Additionally, as mentioned before with the IEP process, that you also have to be aware of any of the SEDS updates that may be affected, may have an effect on the IEP, and you must amend those respective updates accordingly. After you have ensured that these two functions have occurred, then the amendment process can continue and the IEP can then be finalized and will then conform with the new version of SEDS. You do not need to do an amendment simply for the purpose of updating your IEP to match with the SEDS fall release items. We wanted to make you aware of that. The amendment will only happen if you're planning an amendment, let's say, for example, I will go through some of these items. You do not have to go in and amend the IEP if you are just looking to conform with the SEDS, the new version of SEDS. So let me go through and just discuss these 5 relevant items that if you're in the process of, for example, amending an IEP, you should be aware of, and you may need to amend the IEP to conform with these items. The first item that may or may not be affected, again, if you are amending an IEP and you decide that this is a speech-only IEP, there will be a new checkbox that will now pop up to denote that this is in fact a speech-only IEP. So again, if you go in and you decide after October 20th that you're going to amend the IEP and you select a speech-only option, the system will now prompt you to go in and check the box that denotes this is a speech-only IEP. Additionally, if you go in for an amendment after October the 20th, you will now be required to go in and denote the Common Core state standards. They must match up with the alternative achievement standards. So the academic goals that are based on the alternate achievement standards now have to also include corresponding Common Core state standards. Another function that will pop up if you are, again, in the process of amending an IEP, if you have previously selected ESY transportation, the system will now prompt you to answer a question, and this question is essentially, does the regular school year transportation, is it identical to the ESY transportation? And if it is yes, then a checkbox will again appear. You will need to select yes. And what will this do? Well, essentially what this is going to do is in the IEP, it will now show the details regarding ESY transportation. Formerly in SEDS, if you decided that ESY transportation was going to be added, it would not allow you in SEDS to denote that information. Now the system will require that you determine whether or not ESY transportation is identical to regular school year transportation. The fourth impact that you may or may not see, again depending on whether or not you're amending an IEP, is the yes or no question that will pop up for the goals to indicate whether or not an outside agency is likely to be involved in providing a service. We do not have the exact language for this function, but we do know, and I'm going to give Annette a chance to kind of chime in here because she's been part of the process. We do know that a yes or no question box will in fact pop up to allow you to determine whether or not an outside agency will likely be involved in providing a service.
Oh yes, thank you, Dina. Yes, with this new checkbox, the feature that we will explain a little bit later in the webinar today. So we'll get to that in a minute.
And then the fifth possible change, again, if you're in the process of amending, is you will now be required to log any communication attempts to obtain consent from a parent to invite an outside agency to the IEP meeting. And this is not retroactive. So if you have not done this prior to October the 20th, you do not need to go back and re-obtain consent. So let's say, for example, you already had the IEP meeting, the outside agency was involved, and you didn't log those attempts. You do not need to go back and regain that consent or re-log that communication. This will be from October 20th on. One of the additional areas that may or may not affect the IEP amendment process is the related service provider input form, which will be required when you are amending a service type or amount. And we just wanted to quickly highlight the standard IEP amendment form with respect to the case study that we did earlier, case study B, and that's the amendment, the IEP amendment. This is an example of how the IEP amendment will be affected by the new release of SEDS after October, the new release of SEDS, but originally if the IEP was finalized prior to October the 20th. So in this respective case, the users use this form to explain the changes, and the changes in this case may include the speech-only IEP checkbox. So if you decide, again, that this is a speech-only IEP and you amend the IEP to denote that, you will need to, in the standard IEP amendment form, also give some details regarding this change. You will also need to include in the standard IEP amendment form the addition of the Common Core state standards to the alternate achievement goals. And you will also need to denote additional information on the ESY transportation page, whether or not the regular school year transportation matches the ESY transportation. And the reason that the IEP team initiated the amendment process in the first place will still remain the same. Again, you will not need to amend for any of those changes after October 20th. You may be amending for something that is unrelated, and you will need to go in, if in fact you have, like, for example, an ESY, you will need to go in and also provide details after October the 20th. We also wanted to share with you some of the prospective impacts of the SEDS updates on the eligibility process. So there are two areas of the initial evaluation or reevaluation that may be impacted if you start your eligibility process prior to October the 20th, but you do not complete it until after October the 20th. Now, these are not new functions. These are not new features. We are just pointing out that these may be impacted if you have not, in fact, completed it. So, for example, on the Analyze Existing Data page, users are required to seek consent for reevaluation if no additional assessments are required. This is not a new feature. We are just now, the system will now require you to seek consent for reevaluation. And then you must also document these efforts to obtain consent. The other area of the initial or the reevaluation that may be impacted after October the 20th is on the additional assessments page. And you must now denote the assessment duration when you are completing the assessment details page. So we ask that you try and plan ahead now, gather this information. You have a few days to ensure that all this information is available to you. And you want to gather this information for any of the eligibility processes that are open in SEDS at this time. Just be aware of what you have open so that after October the 20th, you may have to go back and ensure that this information is accurate. So we're going to move on right now and talk about the OSSE support tool. We have a few new reports that we wanted to provide you some details on. We also wanted to provide you with an update on the school verification, the verification of the school hours in OST and that effort. And we wanted to give you some information on the responsiveness of the OSSE support tool tickets. So for those of you who were involved in the school hours efforts, thank you for going in and updating your hours. We appreciate it. I think we had a great response, and providing you the link with school hours and the OSSE support tool, I believe, made that effort that much easier. We wanted to remind you that the school hours effort in the OSSE support tool is now closed, and you will no longer see that little clock on the toolbar in the OSSE support tool. If there are any additional changes that you need to make, you must now submit an EMI form, an Entity Management Identification Form. And charter schools must work with PCSB to complete this form, regardless of whether you're an independent or a dependent charter. And if you have any further questions or need some help in obtaining this form or getting in touch with PCSB, we ask that you submit an OSSE support tool ticket. We wanted to provide you with some details regarding our responsiveness to OST tickets. We have two separate categories, and this is the fourth quarter, so this is between July 1st and September 30th. We saw an influx of OSSE support tool tickets related to enrollment and enrollment audit, so this is our prime season for responding to tickets. The percentage of tickets that we resolved that were confirmed by the user, so essentially on your end, you confirmed that we resolved your tickets, was 58%. The percentage of tickets closed due to no response is 42%. And basically, we wanted to let you know what this means is that once we do respond to a ticket and we let you know that we've confirmed it, we really ask that you go in and you close out a ticket. And I'm going to show you in just a second how to go through that process, but it really does help us on our end ensure that our metrics are accurate. We also wanted to share with you that between July 1st and September 30th, the percentage of tickets resolved within 2 business days, 48 hours, was 78%. So we feel like we're getting closer to our responsiveness goal. And again, because this was such a prime ticket time period, we are certainly working towards achieving that 95%. So again, we wanted to just simply remind you, if you do submit an OSSE support tool ticket, what your responsibility is. And essentially, in order to do this, I wanted to just denote what the color system in the OSSE support tool is, so you know what the status of your current ticket is. So once you submit a ticket, you'll notice that when it's in brand new submission, your ticket will appear green in the OSSE support tool. On the state's end, once we have started the investigation process, your ticket will then turn to blue. If we require further information on your end, your ticket will then turn to red, and the red essentially means that the state is requiring some additional information from the requester. So for example, you may have submitted a ticket regarding a specific student concern, but you haven't submitted the USI. In order for us to actually rectify this ticket, we may in fact require that USI from you, and we may pose the question back at you to ask for the USI. So you always want to check your OSSE support tool for these color status indicators in order to determine whether or not your ticket has been resolved. The really important one is yellow. So once you see that your ticket has moved to yellow, and I've already discussed the red, that is asking that you provide us with additional information. Once your ticket has been moved to yellow, it essentially means we've provided you with a resolution. And with this, we need for you to close out the tickets, because that will help then rectify our metrics, and it'll help us ensure that we are providing quality control and we're providing a quick turnaround for responding to these tickets. So when you do see on your roster of tickets that your tickets are yellow, you will also receive an email once we have resolved your ticket. We ask that you check the box below issue description confirming that we have provided a solution that in fact addresses your issue. If you feel like the solution has not been provided, then we ask that you provide us further details in the issue description box, letting us know that we still have to rectify this ticket. If you do not check that box, then the ticket will sit and linger, and we will not know whether or not we have resolved the ticket. So please, on your end, if you can provide us with that function, we will, on our end, try to ensure that we have a quick turnaround and we respond to tickets fairly quickly. So we're going to give everyone a second to just pause and reflect. We've provided a lot of information with regards to some of the SEDS 2014 fall release updates. I've also provided some information regarding the OSSE support tool. So if you have any questions at this time, what kind of questions or comments do you have regarding the section that we discussed? If there are any questions that we cannot address verbally during the webinar, then again, we will certainly address them in the follow-up email that we will be sending. So we're going to give everyone about 2-3 minutes just to put some questions in the question box if you have any.
All right, thank you. It looks like there's no further questions at this moment that we need to address at large, but if your individual questions, we will definitely follow up with you. Now we're going to move ahead and talk about a few resources for improvement in data quality. There's a couple new reports that I'm going to highlight that are in SLED. Then we're going to talk for a minute about your responsibility to request transfer of records, and then just for a couple minutes on your responsibilities for students who might be attending non-public schools or programs. In SLED, as you know, or as you hopefully know, there are a wide variety of SEDS reports available for people in your role to be able to see how your school's doing with compliance and timeliness, also with individual students, with transferring and exiting. There's all sorts of good stuff in there, and we are always trying to create new additional reports that are helpful to you as you are troubleshooting some of your issues with enrollment. There's two new reports available in SLED that I'd like to highlight. The first one is called the Pre-Enrollment Exception Report, and this provides a list of students who are pre-enrolled in your LEA. So they have an entry code of 1800, but they need to be moved to stage 5 enrollment where they become actually enrolled in your LEA. If they're in the pre-enrollment phase, they are not showing up on your enrollment audit or your child count roster, which could be a problem for you if they actually are attending your school. So please take a look at that report if you're experiencing trouble with students who are not showing up in your audit, but perhaps they're maybe pre-enrolled and need to be moved forward there. Some of these reports actually might not be applicable to you in your role, but we ask that you share this information with the registrar at your school that you work closely with regards to enrollment. The other report is the Rejected Exits Report. This is a list of invalid or outdated students with the exit code that have their exit code in the SIS that it's an old exit code. As you know, in this past year we've updated our exit codes to make sure they are more accurate and reflective, more specific to each exit situation. So if you have students lingering with old exit codes, you need to update that information. Otherwise the student will not be properly exited and they will hang out in your enrollment, which could cause problems for you if they really have left your LEA. And this is just a quick summary. If you'd like to find out more information, we have an entire guidance manual about entry and exit that I've provided the link here. And again, these reports are located in SLED on the SEDS Reports tab. And as you know, every month I like to take a poll to see how many of you are actively using all of these report features in SLED. Hopefully by now all of you have attended a SLED training and you are actively, at least once a week, going into SLED and looking at some of the reports. For example, the Planning and Performance Report to see if you have any evaluations or IEPs that are overdue or that you have done late, and all sorts of other reports. So just a quick poll. Please select from the button on the screen. What is your current level of interaction with SEDS reports housed within SLED? A, you do not have access because you are new. B, you do not have access because you did not go to a training. C, you have access, but you have relied on the weekly emails that we have been sending to you with copies of those reports. And as a side note, we are going to stop sending those to you. We're transitioning you over to be self-reliant in logging into SLED and looking at those reports yourself. D, you have logged in there at least once and checked out a report. And E, you regularly use those reports. Half of you have voted. 10 more seconds. Please cast your vote. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. 86% of you cast your vote, which is great. Thank you for your active participation. I'm now sharing the results of the poll. So it looks like 33% of you have chosen E. That's fabulous. I appreciate that you're logging into SLED on a regular basis and looking at those reports. 20% 25% of you have logged in at least once and checked out a report. That's great. Keep it up. And then for the rest of you, it sounds like you have not yet been trained. There have been a few opportunities in the past few months to get trained. The next training date, I have not heard yet from the SLED team what the next training date is, but please, if you have not yet been trained, write down this email address. You need to send them an email today and ask them when you can receive training. And the email address is sled.info@dc.gov. Again, write down this email if you have not received training, sled.info@dc.gov. Send them an email and ask them when you can receive training and your login so that you can start viewing those reports. Thank you for your participation in this poll. Now let's talk about transferring records and your role in requesting that those get transferred. As you know, when you log into the OSSE support tool, there's two different ways the OSSE support tool is used. One way we use the OSSE support tool is, of course, for you to ask us questions and let us know issues you're having. But another main feature of the OSSE support tool is for you to see the list of student records that you might need to transfer into your LEA because they have become enrolled in your LEA, and now you need to manually request that their SEDS records get transferred over now that the student has shown up in your LEA. Now this report is called the Events Not Transferred Report, or the ENT. The expectation is that you are regularly logging into the OSSE support tool, looking at this report, and checking the box to say, yes, please transfer these records over to my LEA in SEDS. If you have been derelict in your duties and you have not been requesting those records, if you have not been proactive, OSSE is monitoring you, and if you let a student sit on this report for more than 10 days, then OSSE is going to go in and manually transfer that record into your SEDS for your LEA. They're going to do that for you because it is really important that we get those records into your SEDS account, otherwise you're not able to serve those students. This report is usually pretty accurate, but if you feel like we've put a student on there saying that they're in your LEA and they're really not in your LEA, you need to immediately send us an OSSE support tool ticket so we can clear that up. So OSSE, every 10 days, OSSE is going in there and cleaning house, looking at all the students that are lingering on that report, and we're going to manually transfer those over. We've been doing this. The most recent manual transfer that we did was on October 3rd, and we sent you an email on October 6th. If you did not get this email, please check your spam folder or make sure that you're on our official listserv, sedsupport@dc.gov. That's the email coming to you that lists those students that OSSE manually transferred over on October 3rd. But if you didn't have any students in this situation, of course, you won't have any on that list that we emailed. This means if a student is at your LEA and you have not yet requested those records, we move them over manually for you. You need to go into SEDS, find that student, and look at their history and see if anything needs to be updated. For example, they could have an expired IEP and they're sitting in your classroom, but you had no idea because you forgot to request that their records get moved over to SEDS. Now that we move them for you because you forgot to do it yourself, you need to go find that student in SEDS, look and see, is there anything out of compliance? What's their IEP? Do I need to get them their services? So that is our expectation, because we do not want students going without their services simply because their records in SEDS have not been transferred over. And again, if you think that we transferred a student over in error, send us a ticket. Now, you should not sit back and let OSSE do this for you. We want you to be proactive and request your own records. We're just saying if you let it sit for more than 10 days, then we're going to step in and do it for you, and we are going to be monitoring to see if you're not fulfilling your duties in requesting those records. And as a reminder, here are the steps that happen when a new student comes to your LEA. We've passed the enrollment season, that's over, we can all relax, but now we're going to focus on individual new students that might pop up throughout the school year. Once they enroll in your LEA, your registrar puts them into your student information system. Then during the nighttime, your information system talks to OSSE through our data transfer system, and the student gets put into our SLEDS database. Then SLED and SEDS get together in the middle of the night. They talk to each other, and SLED says, "Hey, SEDS, I have this student, but you don't. Let's put him on the ENT report." Then the ENT report shows up in the OSSE support tool. You see it there, and you say, "Oh, yes, this student is in my LEA. Let me request their SEDS records." You click the magic button. The SEDS records come on over to your LEA, and now you are able to assign out the student on people's caseloads and start their services. Now, my question for you is, what is your intake process? When a new student shows up on your door, what do? Do you talk to the parent? Do you have the parent fill out a form? How do you find out if the student is in special education or currently has an IEP or might perhaps be in the middle of an initial evaluation? Hopefully the parent will be straight with you and tell you so that you can take action immediately. But as we know, sometimes the parent is not forthright about this. So if you're not able to get that information out right, checking the ENT report on a regular basis will be the way that you find out if the student really does have SEDS records. And if you find out they do have an IEP, you need to provide comparable services in the interim until you're able to get that official IEP transferred over. Now let's talk for a minute about non-public students. Some of you might not yet have students placed at non-public programs, but most of you do. Some of you have a lot of students, and some of you only have a couple students that are currently attending a non-public school. And there has been some issues come up recently with some misunderstandings or some things that LEAs are not quite, that are not doing with their responsibilities for these non-public students. And as a reminder, if a student is attending a non-public program, they are still enrolled in an LEA, and if they're enrolled in your LEA, there's some things you need to be aware of. I've put here a quote from the DC Municipal Code. Even though for your regular students, they have to re-enroll every year, there's a special provision here. If a child enrolled in your LEA is attending a non-public school, they shall remain enrolled with your LEA from year to year unless the parent decides to re-enroll them into another LEA. So again, if it's a non-public student, they're enrolled in your LEA, as you move from school year to school year, they stay enrolled with your LEA. There's not a re-enrollment requirement for those particular students. Of course, they're going to have to do their annual residency requirement and medical records, immunizations, things like that. But when it comes to re-enrollment, there's a special provision here. So you cannot inactivate those student files and SEDS simply because the non-public student has not done the re-enrollment. But of course, it's a closing charter school, or if the student is aging out of your LEA, let's say they're going from elementary to middle school, then this does not apply. Now for a case study. Tiana has been attending the non-public XYZ for the past 3 years. During that time, she was enrolled at LEA number 1. But this school year, the mom decided to enroll Tiana in LEA number 2, even though she continues to attend the same non-public. But now the non-public staff are complaining that they cannot see Tiana's records and SEDS anymore, and her IEP is overdue. So what should LEA number 2 do to resolve this issue and when they're in this situation? Well, there's 3 different steps for things that you need to do if you have a non-public student, especially if they are recently transferred to your LEA. So the first thing you need to do is make sure everything is set with enrollment. So since you're best friends with your registrar, you go talk to your registrar and just make sure that the student is actually enrolled in your system and that the campus is marked as a non-public campus for the campus they are attending. And of course, you're going to check out your ENT report in the OSSE support tool, make sure that you've requested for those SEDS records to transfer over from the previous LEA. And once they do transfer over, you need to give access to the actual non-public staff that are supposed to be serving Tiana. Step 2, once you get those SEDS records, you immediately need to go in and look at the student's history. I've shown here a snapshot of what the student history page looks like. This is in the new SEDS, but the content is the same as the old SEDS. And so you see I've highlighted where the student history tab is, and as you can see for Tiana, highlighted in green is her most recent IEP, and you can see that it is definitely overdue. If this is the case, the LEA needs to immediately hold an IEP meeting, or as soon as possible. This happens a lot where students are new, they show up at your school, and once you go look at them in SEDS, you realize something is out of compliance. So non-public students sometimes can fly under the radar, so you need to be particularly attentive to those students, ensuring that everything is up to date, and if it's not, work with the non-public to get it up to date. And of course, the other thing that you need to always be thinking about for your non-public students is whether or not the student is ready to transition to a less restrictive environment, such as your campus. You have the responsibility to think about their placement at least once annually as part of the annual IEP update. You should always be considering and working towards transitioning that student back to the general education environment if possible, or at least back to your school with various supports in place. Of course, it's not always appropriate at that time, but you need to always be considering it. And here I've shown you a snapshot of our website where we have quite a few resources to help you and your team in thinking about LRE and what's appropriate and how to review their placement. Now we'll take 30 seconds and see if you have any questions from the last few slides from the webinar. All right, thank you. We're now going to move on to the next section, a few training tips, and then this will wrap up the content of the webinar, and of course we'll end with a few reminders and announcements. So I'm going to give you a training tip on post-secondary transition planning, a training tip on adding or removing an area of concern on the IEP, and a couple tips about PARCC accommodations in SEDS. So as you have heard by now, hopefully, there is a change coming to the secondary transition page with the new SEDS updates. Now, I want to explain to you the function of this new feature. I know there's been some confusion in the past few months about what exactly is happening here on this page, so hopefully we can clear this up. First, I want to remind you of what the IDEA law says. And this is regards to how you need to be thinking about involving an outside agency when it comes to secondary transition activities. To the extent appropriate, with the consent of the parent or child who has reached the age of majority, the public agency must invite a representative of any participating agency that is likely to be responsible for providing or paying for transition services. So that is a quote straight from the law from IDEA. And so here at the state level, we are always monitoring how LEAs are involving those outside agencies. And so we've added a new feature that will make it easier for us to track the involvement of outside agencies, and easier for you because it will prompt you and remind you to think about if there's any potential involvement of outside agencies. So a new checkbox is going to be added on the Goals and Activities page for secondary transition planning. And this checkbox, it'll be mandatory. You have to check yes or no, and you're thinking about whether there's any potential outside involvement from an agency such as RSA, DDA, DBH, etc., with the provision of the transition service. If you have any further questions about this, feel free to reach out. And again, this feature will be coming into play starting next week. Now, if you've already finalized your IEP, Dina did talk earlier in the webinar about there could be some potential changes that come up when you try to do an amendment later, but you're not going to have to retroactively go and invite RSA or anything like that if you're simply doing an amendment. These are types of things that you consider when you're doing your annual updates. Now let's talk about how to add or remove an area of concern on the IEP. And this is not a new problem. This is a challenge that has been around for several years in SEDS, and we are working on getting SEDS in the next year. Hopefully next year when we do SEDS updates we can resolve this issue, but in the meantime let's talk about a workaround solution for this. So here's the scenario. Johnny had an initial evaluation done in 2013, and at that time reading was the only area of concern that was checked on the original IEP. Now it's 2014 and the IEP team wants to add math as an area of concern now that they're doing the annual update. However, because math was not checked initially as an area of concern, the IEP team is not able to add math goals or services. And now sometimes users have tried to return back to the eligibility process page to add math as an area of concern because they want it to pop up on the IEP. But going back to that page could potentially initiate the entire reevaluation process, but you're not ready to do that. You're not planning to do a reevaluation until 2016. You simply would like to add an area of concern that was not there originally. So here's a workaround solution for the meantime until we are able to update SEDS hopefully a year from now. So what you're going to do is you're going to use the Manual Events tab. This is a screenshot of the new updated SEDS, but there's nothing new about this process. You could do it today if you want to using the existing SEDS. So what you're going to do is check the Manual Events tab and then choose the Transfer Eligibility section. And when you choose that, this page will pop up and you then can check a new box for an area of concern that you'd like to add. And of course, after you check that box, click the Save button. Don't click Save and Continue because you're not doing the full manual event. You're just clicking Save. And after you do this, if you return to the IEP process page, the area of concerns should now be available for you to add goals and services. And again, if you want to remove an area of concern, let's say it's been a year and you no longer have any concerns about reading, for example, you would follow the same process and you would uncheck the box and then save. So again, this is using the Manual Events tab. This is just a simple workaround solution in the interim until SEDS is able to fully update, hopefully in the future, and allow you to add or remove areas of concern with each annual IEP. And now let's talk briefly about PARCC accommodations before we move to closing out the webinar with announcements. As you know, this year is the year of PARCC. It's coming. We're trying to get ready. We know you're working hard in your schools to try to get ready for this. There's a lot of moving parts here, and we appreciate your work for that. When it comes to PARCC accommodations, we have not yet built them into the SED system. We will be doing that in January, but until then, of course, you need a way to document these accommodations and figure out what they are. We went really in depth on this topic in our September 17th webinar that you attended last month. If you did not attend that webinar, please go and listen to the recording because it goes very in depth on the PARCC accommodations for students with disabilities. And just as a reminder, most of the PARCC accommodations already exist as DC CAS accommodations. However, there are a couple new PARCC accommodations that are brand new that have never existed before because PARCC is computerized. So a couple examples of these new accommodations would be closed captioning and also a paper and pencil option. So those are new. And if your student requires one of these new features, there's going to be some extra documentation required because it's not currently available as a DC CAS option. And so just as a reminder of how this might affect you, right now it's the fall. If you have an IEP team meeting right now, you are asking yourself, does the student qualify for any PARCC accommodations? If they do, then you will use the crosswalk to make sure you are checking the right button in SEDS for the DC CAS accommodation that maps to that same PARCC accommodation. And then you're asking yourself one more question. You're saying, are there any additional accommodations that are brand new that this student might need? Again, the example of that might be closed captioning or a paper and pencil option. If that's the case, then you're going to have to use a new worksheet to show that those new accommodations have been selected. And now this is a workaround solution in the meantime, and then of course after the release in January, everything will be embedded in SEDS and will go much more smoothly. And again, this is the first year with PARCC for everyone, so we're all working together to try to transition over to PARCC from the DC CAS. So we appreciate your patience as we're moving this forward. 3 documents are available. As a reminder, we did review these last month, but a quick reminder, there are accessibility features and there are accommodations for PARCC. If you think about all the DC CAS accommodations that have been in existence in the past, some of those have now become PARCC accessibility features. That means they are no longer an accommodation, rather they are an accessibility feature that any student can have. So you no longer have to mark them as an accommodation, but you can be aware that they are still available in PARCC as an accessibility feature. However, there are still accommodations that will stay as accommodations, and the PARCC crosswalk document for accommodations can help you figure out how to choose the right ones in SEDS, and I will show you an example of this on the next slide. And the third document to be aware of is that special worksheet for those new and special accommodations because the test is computerized. All of these are located on the website I've listed below. So here's how you would use the PARCC accommodations crosswalk. Here's an example. Step 1, your team decides that the student qualifies for the PARCC accommodation of scribing or speech to text. You can see that in the first column. Then you look in the second column. Turns out that accommodation is already available in SEDS, but it's called oral response to test because SEDS still lists things as DC CAS accommodations, even though it's the same thing as the PARCC accommodation. So in SEDS, you check the box for the DC CAS accommodation, and that's good enough to document that they're getting this equivalent PARCC accommodation. Now for those new, there's 9 new accommodations that are not listed in SEDS right now. So you would use this worksheet to document those. And if you're using this worksheet during the annual IEP meeting this fall, you will upload this worksheet behind the IEP in SEDS. And again, you do not have to use this worksheet unless the student actually qualifies for one of these 9 things. Now, if you did not have the chance to use this worksheet because your IEP meeting happened before the worksheet ever became available, then in that situation you would need to do an IEP amendment and upload this worksheet into SEDS. So that's for the rare cases where you already did the IEP meeting and you did not have this worksheet available at that time, but the student does qualify for one or more of these 9 things. And you can do a quick amendment using the documented written agreement process. You do not have to have a meeting. You just need to fill out this worksheet, send it home with the amendment request form, and then the parent can be aware of the accommodation that you're adding. And all the resources for PARCC accommodations are housed on one website on the OSSE site. The link is here. Again, go back and watch the September webinar for more details. And also stay tuned. There will be a even more in-depth webinar. I will be partnering with Michelle Blakey-Tuggle, who is our resident expert on testing accommodations. We will be partnering together to do an even more in-depth webinar to make sure you're very comfortable with testing accommodations with the new PARCC. And this concludes the substantive part of our webinar. I have a couple announcements that I'm going to wrap up with. But if you have any burning questions at this time on what we just talked about, please put them in the question box. I'm going to give about 10 seconds for anyone to type in if they would like to. Great, thank you. And now just a few reminders. Child count. Child count, the deadline has passed. October 8th was the deadline. OSSE is in the midst of reviewing what you have submitted. They're looking for all the anomalies, and they're going to send that list of anomalies back to you on October 20th. So that's next week. Once you get those back next week, you're going to look them over, make any changes, and respond back to OSSE by December 3rd, no later than December 3rd. Of course, you're welcome to respond earlier than that, but that is the final day. A reminder about upcoming trainings. We have one last session of SEDS Train the Trainer on November 14th. We have our monthly webinars, of course, that you're here today. We have one last session of related service providers training next week. And for those of you that correspond with your non-public point of contacts, remind them of their next webinar on December 10th. All of this registration information is available in the LEA Look Forward. The new K-12 program calendar. This is a comprehensive list of all trainings across all different topics, general education, special education, and some deadlines and reminders, Common Core stuff, so many good things. This calendar is updated once a month, and it's posted on the OSSE website, so you can get a broad bird's eye view of everything happening with regards to trainings. And if you see anything you like, you can find the details in the LEA Look Forward. And we have a new and exciting mentorship program that's coming up for new special education teachers. Stay tuned for more details about this. And a reminder that we are in the middle of reviewing and updating the DC municipal regulations, which are the regulations for special education. That's Chapter 30. We are in the middle of reviewing that, and we love to get your input. Many of you have already come to some of our focus groups, and I just want to give a quick reminder that the next focus group is coming up next week, and where we're going to be talking about LRE, and we're going to be talking about discipline. And so that's going to be very exciting. And then in December, we're going to be talking about graduation, secondary transition, and certificates of completion. For more information, send an email to Jamel Peters, and if you want to register, the link is available in the Look Forward, and I also posted the link here. And one final announcement, there's a very exciting event coming up next month. Here at OSSE, we have been trying to think about what we can do to support you and your LEAs as we are all working together to improve student outcomes. We have been brainstorming and thinking about what kind of professional development or event we can hold to help you, and based on your feedback, we have realized that the greatest need at this time is to have an event where you can come and figure out what all the other agencies in DC are doing to help you. So we're going to connect you with all sorts of different agencies from the DC government and other key stakeholders, so you can get together and realize what they have to offer you to support you in your work. So this is a big event. It's at the Washington Convention Center. It's on Friday, November 7th. It's a big deal. It's going to be great. Hopefully you've received an invitation to this already. If not, I encourage you to mark your calendars and tell your administrators at your school about this event, because this is based on what you have told us you would like, how you would like us to help you in improving outcomes for students at this time by getting you together with all these other agencies. Thank you for participating today. If you have more questions, send them to the OSSE support tool. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to send you a follow-up email later this week with any loose ends, and we look forward to seeing you next month at our next webinar. Have a great day.